Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. Today's guest is Tarina Meiring, the founder of Mapula Media and Irise in Amsterdam. I really enjoyed this conversation. We speak about so many different things like how she founded her businesses, growth and relationships, and how to change our perception of fear. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and we go really deep on many subjects, and she even has a few questions for me. Enjoy the episode. So, Tarina, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have our conversation. And just to get started, you started a company called Mapula Media back in 2018. Can you just give a bit of context on what that company does and what gave you the idea to start it?
So it's actually quite a interesting story because I started as a journalist initially. So I was writing lifestyle copy and I was speaking to a lot of people on the street and meeting all these different people. And I then ended up writing more business type of copy and editing. And this was back in the day where blogging and company blogging and corporate blogging in South Africa was at the precipice of it. Everyone was just starting to get going and all that. And then I started working with a tech company, and I just noticed that most of the corporates in the environment hadn't really gotten onto social media yet, and everyone was kind of taking the lead from each other. They were kind of like, oh, should I post on social media? Shouldn't I post on social media? Oh, I don't really want to be that known. Oh, I do want to be known, and so on. And it just made me realize that while I was working with this tech company and helping them with their marketing and making them quite present on social media, their clients weren't. So I actually had a really good relationship with the founder and had a discussion about how I could continue serving them, but we could also serve their clients. So my business was kind of developed from the fact that I saw this need in corporate social media, which hadn't really been done yet, or rather that people were so scared about it. So I kind of broke into that and then developed the business more into a media and advertising kind of house, an agency, which has been really interesting because it grew quite quickly. I mean, obviously social media has been growing for a decade or so, but in South Africa it was kind of lagging behind a bit. I think it was an adoption process that was kind of halting a bit. So the business grew quite nicely based on the fact that everyone just rushed to social media. So the onboarding of that was really great. And then as we grew, we started expanding into different continents. Went to America and then went to Europe. And I was able to scale the business here in Europe, in the Netherlands. And that's where I am right now. But it's still ticking and going in South Africa as well.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned you were doing the journalism writing side of things, but you saw this gap in the market. What gave you the confidence that you would be able to fill that gap in the market and start this company?
I think it was like an obnoxious confidence because I actually did not know what I was doing. I had no baseline for social media. I had no baseline for marketing really because I'd done psychology and history as a degree. And I kind of just went with I suppose it was just, I just went for it because I thought, well, I don't think I actually thought about it. I just went, oh, what a cool opportunity. And I was not riddled with these questions of, am I enough? Should I do this? I was just so determined to prove that I could do this and that I was able to do this that I didn't allow any of the doubts to creep in. I think if I had to do it now, there would be so much reservation because I would be thinking about, I really don't know how to do that. So maybe I should learn first, then do it. Whereas at 21, I was just acting. I was just doing and learning as I went. So like a client would say, well, can you do A, B, and C? And I would sit in the meeting, I'd be like, yeah, that's absolutely possible. And then I'd go home and be like, what is A? What is B? And what is C? And then kind of figure it out along the way and make sure that, when I got back to them or back to something else, that I knew more than I did before. But I think that when starting these businesses or starting something, there's the ability to push past the initial thoughts that could hold you back is the only thing that actually allows any of us to do anything. And I think that in the years of having seen all of these failures and seen all of these successes along the way, I think there's so many of these learnings that I take in that, one, make me more experienced, and I go, oh, what a great lesson, and I can do this better. And then at the same time, I feel like there's those little things that creep in now where I think about it and I overthink it. And I go, yeah, but that failed and that succeeded, so maybe I shouldn't do it that or shouldn't do it that. So I think there's so much like learning that you can do from just doing it, and then, making sure that you don't get into your, I suppose, head about it, because that's what I would probably have done now.
For that, it's so interesting that you say that you'd probably get in your own head now, but you would just took action then. But you've now proven to yourself that you were able to do it and you achieved the success in starting that business. But yet you're still doubting yourself now. Why do you think that is? It's such an interesting, a lot of people go through this, and a lot of people have those doubts, even though they have historical proof behind them. And I'm still trying to figure it out. It's like the reason I started this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think it has a lot to do with our neural pathways. I think we have successes in certain things, and then it's about going up to a new foundational level. So, I think when it was about proving the underlying motivation was to prove that I was capable of doing, starting the business and doing it by myself. Once I achieved that, there was, okay, now you have to put a new goal. But the goal had always been to reach a certain point. And I suppose that's, I read, so many stories about, Olympic athletes, once they get to medal, they end up in either depression or, their lowest days are once they win it. And I think what happens if I look at like just my neural pathway of this, once you reach a different level, you have to push yourself to continue reaching these new levels, and it's new every single time. And I think for me, it got to a point where there was this consistency of change, there was so much new things happening all the time. And at some point, I switched gears and thought, oh, wow, but if I've done all this, I need to do so much more, because now I've achieved this. It's not good enough to just play small anymore. I've got to play really, really big, because otherwise, what was the point of that? What was the point of that? So I think it goes back to your foundational beliefs. All of us have our foundational beliefs that we tell ourselves, the story that we tell ourselves. Are we enough? Are we, are we funny enough? Are we the most athletic? Are we the most this? It's either the positive or the negative ones. And, there's this concept called ANT. It's the automatic negative thoughts. And we all have a baseline of that. We go back to it. Whenever there's stress or struggle, we click back into our automatic negative thoughts. And I think now, with so much more awareness, is such a gift to be able to see all these different things, that I think it's so much easier with awareness to click back into going, oh, I see that foundational belief. I need to play bigger now. And then going, but if I go bigger, I fail bigger. And I think back then, I didn't have anything to lose. I really didn't have anything to lose. And that is the mindset that I have to actively work towards keeping, actually, is thinking, at the end of the day, you don't have anything really to lose. Yes, you have business. Yes, you have, obligations and so on. But you have nothing to lose when you fail. You've actually only got gains. But it's about rewiring that neural pathway constantly to tell yourself, instead of the negative thought, that failing is positive, which I think, after you've been when you failed a few times, you can sometimes think, oh, I can't actually do this anymore. But you've got to keep kind of going, I think.
Yeah, it's so important to frame failure as a positive. I mean, all the best and most successful people in the world are people who have failed over and over and over again. And it's also, it's almost a muscle that you need to keep flexing just to get used to it, and you grow. That's just a byproduct of failure. But we're just, it might be part of our social conditioning as children, where failure is bad, school marks, like failing, big red X, and so you're like scared of it. And I don't know if it's a problem with our schooling system, but that's I've gone down that path a few times, and I find it very interesting about how archaic and backwards a lot of it is. But
yeah, and it's exactly that, as you were saying now as well. Like there is Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx, who's the founder of Spanx, and she grew up in a household where her father would ask them every single day to come home and to tell him what they failed at today, and would celebrate the failure. And if they didn't have anything to tell what they failed at, it means that they didn't try. And she grew up learning that failure was inevitability. It was something good and praise. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. Like, I think we're conditioned to believe that failure is the worst thing that can happen, and that it's either success or failure. Instead, and pinning one against the other, not thinking that they're they're completely integrated. It's one concept of life. That it's not that achievement and failure is not you got an A for this subject, but you got a C for this subject. So you obviously if you're failing at this, okay, if you reframe that, and we reframed what it meant, that like kind of means is possibly that there's more learning opportunities for something that we don't know rather than we do. And I think that that's what you talk about so like succinctly on the newsletter as well. Like even just like another excuse is that it's that concept of coming up with all of these reasons that we don't want to fail. All of these reasons that we want to succeed, but we don't want to fail, and then don't see how those are, intertwined with each other.
yeah, exactly. And even though I'm writing the newsletter that's based on that idea, I still really struggle with not being fearful of failure. It's so like ingrained in me that, and like I'm aware of it, but I really struggle with being comfortable with failing and just trying things. And I've almost got to like psych myself up to take that leap and be okay with failing. It's not just, it's easier said than done, and it's something I'm constantly working on. So you mentioned autonomous negative thoughts, and that's also something that's just like a part of us. But how do you have any like tricks, or how do you get over those, or how do you work on not letting those things determine your thoughts?
So it's actually quite interesting because it is such a unconscious thing that we do, and it requires quite a lot of. I mean, the first thing it does require quite a lot of introspection. For you to understand what your go-to is in any state, whether you're happy or sad, it's about looking, I think, at where they actually stem from. And we can all go to therapy, and we can all get a lot of those, fundamental childhood things out our way, but what it really boils down to is, for me at least, is looking at any situation, looking at where the validation comes from. So the negative thoughts that come up, it's about where I'm searching, where there's a lack of. So for me is that when I actually look at, this is going to sound so wooey, but when you think something, it's about purposely doing something that interrupts the thought. So for example, if this happens a lot when I write. I write. And as I'm typing it, I'm going, oh, this is so funny, this is hilarious. And like as I'm speaking it in my head, so I'm like, oh, this is great. Then when I read it back, I'm like, well, this sucks. And then I delete some things, and then, you kind of get like I start thinking about going, oh, this is actually not a good topic. Like no one's going to look at this. No one's going to read this. No one's even going to find this funny. Oh, maybe I should just start a new topic. And you go down a cycle of thoughts and it's going to continue. And then until you realize what the pattern is that I've done something, I haven't gotten it right the first time. So the first thing I click back into is that my brain waves and my neural pathway take me back to my foundational belief of, and in this case, it's, is it enough? Is it good enough? So if every single thought, all of the automatic thoughts that come into my head is going to lead me back to the point where I'm going to sit and I'm going to go, am I enough? Is this ever going to be enough? I already know that that's what's the end point. I already know that the catharsis is going to come when I sit there and I go, you're right, world, I'm not enough. So to interrupt that, as soon as it starts, this is the woo-woo part. As soon as it starts, you have to I actively say out loud. So instead of it being a thought, I say out loud going, yeah, this sucks, but it's the shitty first draft. And then I start again. So then I actually say it out loud because if you voice something, you make it vocal, it interrupts your thoughts. And the moment that you're able to do something that interrupts the thinking, you train yourself to not go down the exact same pattern every single time. And that's simple, like it's almost like habit stacking, is that every single time that you go down a path of thinking, you actively have to do something to interrupt it. And the biggest lesson I ever learned from that is you have to do what is counterintuitive to what you want to do. So when I sit down and I'm staring at my computer and it's, all these thoughts are going in my head or anything like that, the last thing I want to do is go and have a cup of tea and tell myself it's going to be okay, you're enough, you are loved, you are safe, you are all these things. It is the last thing, and I actually laugh at myself even thinking of the fact that I'm going to do it. And then somehow, every single time I do it, and I interrupt myself, I go make tea, and I sit there and I think to myself, I'm about to do something absolutely ridiculous and tell myself all of these really like affirmation things. And I sit there and I find it so ridiculous that I've interrupted my thought process. So the act of interrupting yourself requires you to do something that you're not wanting to do, that you can maybe laugh at yourself about.
That's so interesting. I'm definitely going to use that. Stand in the kitchen, speaking to myself out loud. But I understand how that would work because it's very a similar sort of thinking to meditation, where you notice the thought and then you simply let it go and focus back on the breath. It's like acknowledging that there are thoughts entering your head, but they're not important thoughts and you're not going to let them affect you, and you sort of let them go. And meditation has helped me a lot in that instance. And I feel like I'm not as affected by my thoughts. I don't get in my own head nearly as much.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, do you find with your meditation, is it a practice that you've actually cultivated that you do consciously in the mornings or the evenings, or is it something that you're doing like throughout the day? How do you do that?
I do 10 minutes every morning, and I feel like I need to start doing more. But it started with, I've forgotten the app now, a Headspace. I started with Headspace doing 10 minutes guided meditation. Did that enough times where I sort of learned each step of the process, and now I just sit in silence and do it myself.
Wow, very impressive.
But I find it so helpful, and I noticed such a drastic change that I don't get in my own head anymore. I'm not deep in negative thoughts. Like, that never ever happens to me anymore.
Really?
Yeah, and it's just from the practice of meditation. And so, like, I'd swear by it, but I also understand how difficult it is to make it part of your routine and to stay disciplined with it. It is very difficult, and you also don't feel like you're doing anything. Like, you don't feel like you're making progress because those thoughts come in and you've been told that thoughts are bad and you're failing at meditation, and so people give up. But those thoughts are part of the process, and the meditation part is letting go of that thought. So that really resonates with me. And you also mentioned habit stacking, which is something, well, after reading Atomic Habits, sort of changed my life too. And it's so helpful to stack existing habits with ones you want to take on, and you can start a whole new routine by just habit stacking different things. Have you stacked habits, and what habits are you sort of trying to take on at the moment?
Well, I'm like incredibly into forcing myself to get to reading at the moment, because there was a period where, okay, I have very, I'm going to confess, but I have two very different habits around reading. My one, habit, kind of guilty pleasure, is that the one habit is I buy books all the time. And the other habit that I don't do that often is actually read them. So I'm trying at this point in time to, because I was in that spiral of having so many books and not having time to read, I was listening to Audible a lot, which is great. I was like getting my way through so many books, but the actual, physical reading has so many neurological benefits to our memory, to our attention span, our concentration, that I really wanted to get back into reading and doing all those type of things. So now what I'm trying to do is that every evening, once I like finish brushing my teeth, as I start brushing my teeth, I start thinking about the book that I'm about to go and read. And then it's about like where I go and sit, where I put my dogs to sleep and so on, is where I take the book and I carry it with me. So I pick up the book just after I brush my teeth, and then I walk around the house, putting the lights off, holding this book. And the only reason I hold the book is because I know that I've walked around the house, I've put off all the lights, I've put the dogs away, and I'm still carrying this book. And if I don't read something out of it, then it's just pathetic. So then I've try to get myself to, okay, brushing your teeth, within 10 minutes, you're going to be reading. And then because I read before then I automatically like fall asleep afterwards as well. So it's actually improved my sleeping too. And I've tried to, I try to, when I walk the dogs for a really long time, so if it's a long walk, like half an hour, an hour, then I try and actually listen to a podcast or do something. If I don't want to be, if I want something to stimulate me. But I must say that I find the concept of habits such an intriguing one, because I find that I have these habits that I have around work, how I work, like what I do in the mornings, what I do in the evenings, and I put it all in my calendar. And I feel like my calendar just like shouts at me all the time about all these like absurd things I've put in it, that I end up changing my habits every 6 months, which is, I think, the antithesis of what it's really the goal of it. But I'm always trying to find new ways to engage my brain. And then when I find a habit, I become too complacent in a specific habit, I try and like change it slightly. So then instead of reading in the evening, I read in the morning, or I just do Audible or something like that. So I'm really not the go-to on habits, I would say, because I change them so often, and like try and get the most out of how I can do it. So like water and tea and coffee and all those, I try pair them all together so I can get my water in and so on. So I mean, like, I'm really not the expert at habits, but I do want to ask you about yours, because I feel like in the newsletter you speak a lot about all these different like bits of information that you get, like psychological information, like I mean, I know you write about a lot about like Web3 and so on. When do you actually write? Like, when is your habit of writing? Is it the morning? Is it the evening?
Well, when I write my newsletter, I actually cram it on a Sunday, because all of my writing I do at work. So I'm writing like 8 hours a day, basically, non-stop LinkedIn posts for like founders and executives. So I'm using that part of my brain regularly, which is really nice because I enjoy it. But when it comes to editing the podcast and writing my newsletter, I sort of cram it on a Sunday, which isn't great. But I'm constantly thinking of ideas, and so I'll because my newsletter is broken into 4 different sections, whatever I consume, if I have a thought, I'll put those thoughts in those sections. And so I have a notes tab on my phone, and I will probably today or tomorrow, during midweek, I will put those 4 topics in there. And so I know what I'm writing about. And then if I do have time, I'll write one of the sections. But if I don't, then I'll do it all on the Sunday. But I know by Sunday I will have those sections, and whatever topic I'm writing about will be in there. So I'm not thinking about it by the time I get to it on Sunday. I'm just knocking it out. And I feel like it's a good enough topic to write about.
They're always great.
Thanks.
So do you find like there's a difference in how your perception is when you write? So I know, for example, when I used to write a lot more, doing personal branding and all that and ghostwriting, I was writing so much from the perspective of other people that I actually stopped writing for myself for a long time, because I couldn't find what I suppose it wasn't that I couldn't find my voice, I just couldn't remember the style that was my own, because I was writing for so many different people and so many different companies. So are you quite comfortable in your style, and do you find it to be easy to write from your style, or do you also find it difficult to kind of switch over how you write?
I suppose because I do it on the Sunday and I'm not doing it during the week when I am writing in many people's tone of voices, it is a bit easier. And I say a lot of what I write out loud. So I try to write how I speak. And so I'll say the sentence and it's like, would I say that? So I'm going through the whole process trying to deliver it in a way that I feel like I'm speaking what I write, if that makes sense.
Do you read it to someone else before? Like, do you read out loud what you've written as a draft to someone, like a partner or something like that, before you send it? Or do you kind of just read it yourself and then send it away?
I just read it myself. I wish Annie, my girlfriend, had the time. She is my biggest critic, but in the best way.
Yeah.
She's really helped me improve my writing. But no one else sees it until I send it out. And so sometimes mistakes do creep in, or I post a wrong link and someone will tell me about it on the Monday when it comes out. And because it's a newsletter, it's in your inbox and there's nothing I can do about it. I can change the version on the website, but there's nothing I could do about the newsletter. And so that also sort of teaches me to, be more diligent, check my writing a bit more. But yeah, it's that's the process that's working at the moment. But I am trying to edit the podcast and the newsletter a bit more in the evenings, so I don't leave it all on the Sunday, because it leaves a bit too much for me to do on the Sunday, and it feels like my Sunday is sort of gone. Where I don't mind doing like 3 to 4 hours on a Sunday, but like last Sunday it took up a bit too much of my time, and I was like, oh, this needs to change. I need to find a bit more balance. So yeah,
and I find that is the thing between doing things that we really love and then it becoming a bit of a chore. Because I think once you start getting into a pattern of the things that you love and like the things that you fill your spare time with, when it actually starts impeding on, you're going, oh, okay, this is actually taking more time than I wanted to, or this is actually starting to become like something that I need to just check off instead of the joy of doing something. And I don't think that our passions are always something that is going to be is going to be a joy, because our passions aren't just joyful all the time. They are also work. But I think sometimes it becomes that line where you have to look at what it is that you're super passionate about and how you can actually structure it into your life so that it stays a passion. Because that was what I found to be the most challenging about doing marketing and media and advertising, was that in the beginning it was really great and I thought it was so exciting, and I was learning so much and I was doing so much, and we were coming up with the most incredible campaigns and ads, and it was all really fun. And then somewhere, because I was doing it every minute of every day, and I was hardly sleeping, and I was live, breathe, eating everything about it. Somewhere along the way, it stopped becoming a passion, but it started becoming work. And once you tick over from it being a passion to it being work, I think then somewhere we change the way that we approach it. It starts becoming either an all-consuming thing that we just have to do and we carry on, or it becomes this thing that we either get to do or want to do. And I think that that becomes the difference in our lives, is that the things that we want to do, or rather the things we get to do, are these really incredible passion things, and can be our careers and everything. But once we switch over to like, I have to just get this done, it starts becoming this thing that is going to, I suppose, drop off at some point, because we're going to get to a point of going, actually, I don't have to do this, and then stop.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I think about quite often. And luckily with the newsletter, I don't spend too much time on it, so it doesn't feel like it's a chore to me, but it's still holding me accountable, and I have to pay attention in those 4 categories to learn something from all of those processes. But I'm not just learning by, like, say, listening to a podcast or something. I have to actively listen or read or watch and realize that that's an interesting point that I can then write about. And so I feel like I pay attention a bit more than I previously used to, which is great. And also with it not becoming a chore, I see delegation in terms of the podcast as a possibility down the line. And so I don't see this as like a long-term me editing the podcast every Sunday till eternity. I see me doing the parts I enjoy, which is this, having the conversations with people, preparing for the episodes, that type of thing, and then delegating the editing part and creating the short videos. But that's if it gets big enough where I can afford to pay people to do that. And hopefully it does. But
It will.
Oh, thank you. But the only way it'll get there is just consistency. And so
Yeah,
I think for me to be very against the editing and almost consider stopping, I think it would take a lot, because I've got a really long-term view for this type of stuff, and the enjoyment and upside I get from the writing the newsletter and chatting to people about what they do and their thought processes far outweighs the admin parts of it. So I suppose, like you touched on it earlier, it's sort of mindset thing and framing it. And for me, the positives far outweigh the negatives. So I'm definitely sticking to this indefinitely.
Yeah. And I think it's what you're also talking about, is to have that long-term plan. I think it's so important in all the things that we, do on a daily basis, to know why we're doing it. And I think that why can shift as often as possible. And I think it's just, I suppose the most important thing really is to understand what at the end of the day is your why, and how long that can fuel you for too, in anything that you do. And I think with our careers as well, because I think we think we have to know our why by our early 20s. And by the time we're in our 30s, we must be super established and have everything sorted and have our careers done. And that's why I think the more people I talk to that are 29, I think it's the 9s are always an existential. So whether you are, not 19, we weren't having existential crisis at 19, but 29, 39, 49, 59, it's always the 9s where there's this creeping of what did I accomplish this decade, and what am I going to accomplish the next decade? And somehow or another, I find that we hang on to what we thought we needed to get done at 21, or the belief set and value set and the why of our existence has evolved and will continue to evolve so much that at 29 now, that we kind of look at our lives and we go, okay, now we're going into the big leagues. Now we're like adults. Like, we're not going to be in our 20s anymore. Now we need to really have it together, because now we can't just be like, oopsie, I made a mistake, and blame our 20s. Now we are, trusted to make really serious decisions. A lot of us are really, most of us are getting to a point where our careers are something that we are now really invested in, whereas before we had the privilege of being able to find our experiences, wherever we wanted to find them. And I find that now more than ever is that era that we're going, like, this year is, well, more people I speak to in this age bracket, it's about finding what the new why is for ourselves, or what our outdated beliefs are and what our current beliefs are and what we would like our beliefs maybe to be, instead of going into a new era of our lives thinking we need to hold on to this same value set or belief set that fueled us our 20s. Because, well, mine definitely, I'm not taking it into the 30s.
Quick interruption from me. The podcast is starting to gain traction, which is amazing, and thank you so much for the support. If I could ask you to do one little thing, could you please rate this podcast on whichever podcast platform you listen on? That little action goes a lot further than you think and would really help the podcast grow. Thanks in advance. I really appreciate it. Back to the episode. Well, it sounds like you're describing my life. Exactly. I've always, like, there's so many periods in my 20s where I thought I'd figured out my why, but I was completely wrong. Just like even what I studied in university, coming to the end of that, I realized it was something I didn't want to do. And the why was to impress people and not because I was interested in it. And then that sort of shattered my identity, and I had to, like, sort of pick up the pieces and try to put it together and come up with a new identity. And then it happened in Hong Kong like a few times where I'm just trying to figure it out, trying to figure out my identity and find my why. And so I feel like it's been a constant process of ticking off directions I don't want to go in rather than figuring out the direction I want to go in. And I'm okay with that, but I know a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people are really afraid of that sort of thinking or a concept. But to me, I feel like life is a process of ticking things off, and then you get close, ticking things off that you don't want to do, and you get closer to you, basically. But yeah, I just feel like it's everyone's figuring it out. That's also something I've learned, that when I was a lot younger, looked up to people, you assume that they have their shit together and they know exactly what they're doing. And then as you get older and you start working and interacting with these people that are 10, 20 years older than you, you realize they have no idea what they're doing. And they're also just fumbling around trying to figure it out. And some people are just able to come across more confidently and, like, pretend that they know what they're doing better than others. And that's all it is. But everyone's scared and trying to figure it out.
And that's the thing, is that I genuinely, like, I saw this shirt today on the ferry. It said, stop trying to be perfect or something like that. And, we get that message a lot now, especially on social media. Everywhere is like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. You don't have to, all these type of messages. But, at the same time is that we hold on to these little parts of our identities and want to mold them and not let go. It's almost like a sunk cost, like we don't want to let go. Like you said about your like a shattering of identity. We don't want to let go of an identity, even when it doesn't serve us, even when there is nothing of that identity is actually molded by us, but we allowed it to be molded by the people we were around, the education, our families, our friends, whatever it was, molded it. And then when it shatters, or you kind of look at it and you go, that's not actually what my identity is. I think it might be something else. That fear, that leaning into that fear of actually saying our identity is going to shatter over and over and over again. And that we're going to end up looking around going, I bought all these books and I'm not interested in any of these topics. Why did I buy these books? or thinking about all of a sudden, you want to change the direction of your business, but you think that you have to hold on to it because if you let it go, are you a failure? Or if you let it go, what are people going to say? Are they going to say you're not an entrepreneur anymore? Are they going to say, what are they going to say? And we spend, I think all of us in some way or another are looking for someone to tell us our identity makes sense. Or for someone to hold out a book and for us to go, yes, I fit that description, okay, that's mine. That's why we all love personality tests so much. We love being validated. We want someone to tell us they see us, they understand us, because 99.9% of the time, we don't see ourselves and we don't understand ourselves. And because we can't see and understand ourselves, the thought of letting go of something we understand about our identity is terrifying. And, I resonate a lot to the fact that there were so many decisions that I made as well in the business, in my life, decisions where I look back on and I go, well, what was going on there? And then there's other, there's moments where I think back, I'm so happy that I made decisions based on an identity that I, at that point in my life, was very comfortable in. That identity is so far from who I am right now that, it's about like changing friends, changing cities, changing everything about you. And then you realize how non-fixed our identities really are. Like, they're so changeable.
Exactly. And you touched on it a bit there, but something I kind of grapple with from time to time is changing and growing and friendships. And I find it sometimes tricky to feel like you're outgrowing a friendship, but you still want to hold on to it. And have you ever struggled with that, or how do you balance that if you have?
Oh, I have. Oh, I've gone through so many of those. And I think that, firstly, I think that we make friends. We connect with friends only so much as we connect with ourselves. So I think that there are phases in my life where I made really good friends, but I connected with them on a part of an identity that I didn't like. So it actually had nothing to do with the friends or the friend group I was in, but I was partaking in things that I didn't like, actually, or I didn't want to do. So I didn't want to hang out with them. But the process of actually moving on from friends that, one, you've outgrown, is really challenging, because I think you have to weigh up whether you do the thing where you actually have the conversation with them and you say, peace and love and kindness,
Yeah.
but we've outgrown each other and now we're moving on. Or it's this, the gradual ghosting of how you just gradually fade. And I think all of us secretly hope that we just all fade away and we don't have to have these really difficult conversations, because the conversations, they suck. At the core of everything, it's having to come to a point where you're telling someone, and this is relationships too, that you're just not where you are anymore. You're not in that place where you feel that you add value to each other's lives. And a lot of times being honest and open about those are, it's very relieving at the end, but I think it always hurts. And because it always hurts, we always feel we have this hope of just, maybe if we just stop hanging out with them, we'll just kind of forget about each other. But we can't just forget about each other because we have social media. So I think it's so much easier. I think, the days of when we were, really young at school, we didn't want to be friends with someone. We never had to see them again. We didn't have to see them online. We didn't have to do anything. Whereas now I feel like there's this unspoken obligation to be in contact with people, because either you're friends with their friends, or we went to school together, or we went to university together, or, any of those connection points. But I think that at some point we've got to kind of look at, or rather I made a decision to look at how valuable the connection was to my life and the value that I was actually able to provide them. And if I was feeling like they were adding no value to my life, then I first looked at what value I actually added to theirs. And every single time that I felt that this person wasn't adding any value to mine was because very brutally, like, I was adding zero value to theirs. So when we actually acknowledge how we've outgrown friends that are in certain areas, it might not even be that we're outgrowing them. It's that we're just no longer adding value in the ways that we used to add value, and that it's actually a gift to be able to give someone the opportunity to find value somewhere else, even though it hurts. And I say that not being very self-actualized in it. Every time it happens, it sucks.
Yeah. And it saying you're outgrowing someone actually it almost gives a negative connotation towards the other person, almost saying like, I'm growing and you're not. And I don't feel like that's not necessarily the case a lot of the time. I think it's more that your interests and identities are sort of diverging. You're going down different paths, and maybe the friendship isn't meant to be anymore. And I actually found that when I stopped drinking, I started paying more attention to my friendships in that way, and how much do we actually have in common, or is all we have in common just sitting around a table and drinking beer? And I found that was actually very common, and so I started reflecting a bit more on that and realizing that I want more friendships that impact my life positively. And so I'm going to pick and choose my friendships and spend time on those relationships a bit more thoughtfully than I previously did, because drinking for me was sort of an easy way it was like a social lubricant, and I relied on it very heavily.
Yeah.
So I want to chat about your other company that you started, Irise. You started in 2020 and you did it remotely. But could you give me a bit of background about what the company does and how you and your co-founder decided to start this business?
So it actually started with both of us were in this nonprofit organization that was helping Doctors Without Borders the beginning of COVID. And we're working with, we didn't know each other. We just joined remotely, and all of us were helping to create, like live streams. That was the beginning of live streams and all that. And we were basically just in the same meetings a lot of the time. And she messaged me afterwards, and we stayed in contact. And she's Dutch. And we stayed in contact. And then she actually became a client. So I ended up helping her with the marketing of her businesses and so on. And then about 6 months or 8 months into a client relationship with her, she said to me, she was like, well, why don't we do Irise together? And I said, okay, well, what a good idea. Let's do it. And then we just kind of hopped on. We'd never met in person. The only thing that we knew is that we had a lot in common around languages. When I say languages, she speaks like a billion of them. I don't speak all those languages, but I had more of the psychological aspect, but her curiosity of why do people behave the way they do, and because she had this linguistic background of why people speak the way they speak and so on, we just had all of these conversations about what motivates people to speak the way they do, and when they speak the way they do, what motivates people to behave based on that, and how much does our words and our language influence our behavior. And that's kind of where Irise was born, was because we were studying human behavior and how it impacts the way we speak, and just realized that there was so much about communication that impacted all of us in our relationships, our friendships, and our own thoughts. The way that we communicate to ourselves and all of that plays such a big role in how we show up at work, how teams communicate to each other. And so I moved to the Netherlands beginning of 2022. And now we're here. And basically what we focus on is looking at how language actually shapes every single thing that we do, and how we can actually leverage the communication that we have with ourselves, with others, and create more productive teams. We can create more productive places within ourselves, and actually make value out of the things that we do if we just look at and have awareness around why we say what we say and why we do what we do.
Okay, cool. And so for clarification, how do you guys make money?
Right. The fun part. So we basically give a lot of, we do workshops and we do trainings. And then what we also do is we basically develop psychometrics for companies based on what they're actually wanting to achieve. So psychometrics in general are really broad. If you look at like specific, like Myers-Briggs, you look at archetypal ones, IQ, EQ, a lot of companies are still using very generalized psychometric testing. And if you actually incorporate the values of the company and the goals they're wanting to achieve for specific positions, we can create more psychometrics based on people's communication styles. So if your communication styles match up with each other, then you can actually know how to form your teams. You can actually know whether the person is going to be, how do they take criticism? How do they understand specific ways? Have they got a more assertive language style, more empathetic language style? If you know how people speak, you'll know how to create teams that actually understand each other. And if you have teams that understand each other and can work together, well, then your productivity will go up quite a lot because you'll have high-performing teams.
That's so interesting. And do you guys monitor the performance of these teams after you've consulted a company?
Yeah. So we work with a company in a sense that we work with them with the KPIs. So we work alongside them to A/B test how to put the teams together and to watch and monitor them based on very specific goals. So I mean, doing what we want to do is very goal based. You have to go in for very specific project, work on the project, make sure that indeed what you have told them to do, turn their teams around or change certain aspects of the way that they do things fundamentally is tracked enough that by the time you leave, you're not just coming in once and doing one little fix and they don't know what happened. You fundamentally want to come in, you want to show them how they can do certain things, and then they can function by themselves, and they know how to do it. So the company as a whole business becomes healthier and the communication of the company ultimately changes or improves rather, which translates into, marketing and sales and so on as well. But that we're not relied upon as, I think that's the mistake, in my opinion, that a lot of companies make, is that they want a company to be dependent on them in order for their success. And I think the biggest goal is that you want to go to a company, you want to work with them, and you want to actually, you want to teach them how to fish so they can fish for themselves. Because you don't want to be in a position ever where a company doesn't want to work with you, but they don't know how to do it without you. You don't want to be in that kind of a relationship with companies, or at least we don't want to be. So yeah, definitely it's about forming a relationship and then making sure that by the time we leave, that the goals have been, achieved.
That's an interesting business model. It's not the normal way of doing business. I mean, not having like return customers. It's if you do your job well enough, they're not necessarily going to come back anytime soon.
Yeah, you don't want. I mean, I think in terms of return customers, we'd never want with they're definitely going to consult with us or something like that in different products and so on. But you don't want to be going in and reteaching the exact same thing every single time, because that means that you're not doing your job. And building relationships with customers. And, I learned that in my, in the media agency too, is that, when you build a relationship with your customers to a point, and your clients to a point where your services are invaluable to them, in the sense that they're not dependent on you because there is no alternative. There are, of course, alternatives all the time. Like, no one's business is that unique at this point in time that there are no alternatives. There always are going to be. But when you become invaluable in your relationship with your customer or with your client, then them returning, they're not coming back to ask you to teach them the same thing. They're coming back to find out, what else can you teach us? Okay, so you've just shown us that by using empathy in these use cases, okay, we've just improved this in terms of our productivity or profitability, or, whatever the metric was. Okay, great. So what if we use that, come teach it in this sector of the business, or come teach it there, come do that there. What about this? What about that? Because I think once you offer value, people don't turn away from value. They'll keep coming back for that to grow even more. So I definitely don't want return customers to come back and ask us to reteach the same thing, but definitely have them stay. No one is a once-off. And I think every business model in terms of once-off, you don't ever want someone to come once and then never come back. You want them to come back and check on if there's anything new. And if you only have one product, cool, but they want to find out if you're going to launch another product one day.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's a better way at building brand equity, where you're acting in good faith and you're promising to do a good job. And if you do a good enough job, then they shouldn't need you to provide the exact same service. And so would you say what you do today makes you happy? You really enjoy what you do?
Yeah, I love what I do. Like, I find that with Irise specifically, it kind of amalgamates the psychology and the writing and the connection with people. It really is, I suppose, a combination of a lot of passion in specific areas and knowing that it's exactly what I want to do. And I think it was I don't think it was a natural evolution from marketing agency, but I definitely find myself being quite happy about it all in that sense.
So what has been the most surprising lesson you've learned on your Irise journey so far?
I'd say it's about how flexible you have to be with your very fixed assertions. So I came in very confident about very specific things of what I knew, and I've had to learn to let go of all of the beliefs I had around what I learned, and to constantly know that what I learned today can be debunked tomorrow, and that I can find new information and new research that will, be that. And by hanging on to old, kind of hypotheses actually impacts the ability to evolve. So it's pushed me far beyond what I thought I was capable of in terms of my capacity for flexibility. I am naturally more inclined to a stubborn personality type. So it has pushed me the most, and for the better. I think Irise and starting it like this and coming over here and learning all that has actually made me a better friend. I think it's made me a better partner, because of my ability to look at not everything as not finite and not fixed.
That's interesting. So what gave you the confidence to move overseas? And you started the company remotely and then you confidently moved. Well, I don't know if you did it confidently, but what gave you the confidence to move to Amsterdam and carry on running the company?
I feel like it's the same answer, as like when I was 21. I didn't really think about it. I feel like it was a natural evolution of, I had to do it. Not doing it would be more detrimental to not. And I am a very firm believer in the fact that when you are given any opportunity, that if you overthink the opportunity and you don't grab it and go for it, that it might not come again. And it just felt that there were very specific times in my life where it was the opportunity to start the first business. That opportunity came, and that window was quite small, and I made sure that I crawled through and I took that opportunity. And this one was it was a bit of a long shot, but I can't believe how much has happened in the 15 or 16, how long I've been here, 15 months that I've been here. And I know that it wasn't necessarily confidence that I came over with. I definitely had very little confidence in it. Like, I was wrecked with nerves and about every aspect of my life. But I think it was more the belief that my life would be infinitely better with an opportunity to grow, rather than staying in a place where I wasn't growing quick enough. And I think the pushing yourself to actually do the thing that's really, really scary, I think is the same kind of principle that I'm taking into everything else. I think it's the same as, I remember when I was in my 20s and I went bungee jumping for the first time. And I was walking and I was doing it with two of my friends, and they were they went ahead of me, and they basically told me I wasn't planning to do it, and they said, Tarina, like, we're gonna do it, but don't worry, like, you really don't have to do it. And they were like tall guys, and I was like, I can do this, I'm not scared. And then they went and jumped, and they looked like they had such a great time, and then I had to walk to the edge. And I walked over these grates, and there was like nothing beneath me. And as I was walking there, the whole time I kept thinking in my head going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I hate this. I hate this. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. Then I got to the edge, and eventually the guy was like, well, you have to jump. And I said, you're going to have to push me because I'm not going. And I don't know if he pushed me or not, but there I was bungee jumping. And I kind of view every single thing that I do now as that bungee jumping moment of going, well, if I don't jump, like, someone's going to push me, and that someone just has to be me. So that's kind of how I view it now.
That's a great way to view it. So you touched on, like, changing your environment can really help with growth. And I really find that to be true. That's why I left Hong Kong, because I felt like I was getting stagnant there. And luckily I was able to persuade Annie to come with me. And so much has changed. Been here a year now, but like, my life has completely changed. I also changed careers. It was just but I knew changing your environment can really help with that. And so, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you've hosted many interesting discussions and events with Irise. Are there any particular topics that stood out for you that you found the most interesting?
Definitely fear. We talk a lot about fear, and fear is fundamental in our communication model, mainly because fear is such a pivotal part of our existence. And the fear that we all have in the decisions we make is something that we all tend to think that we just have to conquer our fear. And it's the exact opposite. We don't have to conquer anything. It's simply about knowing that the fear that we feel is the one safety we have. The one constant we have in this life is our fear of everything, because our body and our mind is working so hard to protect us all the time, that the fear that we feel, that we think that it's our mind telling us not to do something, but it's really our mind just going, that's new. That's interesting. That's brand new. We are not sure that this is going to work out great for you. And the most interesting discussions I've had is about how people have made fear something that is their friend. And fear is the one constant that they keep. And if they're not scared of something, it's not big enough. If they're not scared of something, that means they don't care enough. And I think when you start equating fear to how we live as a positive, we can actually fundamentally change everything about our lives. And that's the one thing that I think teaches me the most in in business and in communication is the fact that now every single time that something scares me, I know that it's something valuable. When something doesn't scare me at all, it doesn't give, like the butterflies or anything like that, it means I'm either not invested in it or it's something that I've become complacent in. And I think that those are incredible markers, because the moment that you realize you're complacent in something, there's a lot of work there to do as well. So I'd say that fear in people, and power. Power is an interesting one too. But for this conversation is, I think, fear. And I think that, you speak about that like a lot as well. Like, not just like conquering it, but making it like we wouldn't talk about it, but everything that you talk about that you've done, it's making it your friend. Moving to Hong Kong, then moving to making the decision of going, okay, well, now I'm changing my life again. I'm changing my career again. Those are consistent fear like behaviors, because everything in our bodies and everything in our minds get us to a point of going, the unknown is inevitably scary, and still making those decisions, which is exactly what you've been doing. The moving that you've been doing, like you're talking about changing your friend group, talking about, as you're saying, like stopping drinking, stopping all of these things that were so fundamental part of like your identity, completely starting fresh consistently. That's scary stuff.
It's so interesting that you say that, because there's some things you mentioned there where I feel like I've overcome those fears. Like the moving thing, I think the big move was to Hong Kong, but then me moving back to London almost seemed not as scary. And so I didn't see that as like as much of a growing opportunity, although it obviously was now looking back. But I seem to focus on the fears that I'm actually afraid of, and I almost get frustrated with myself because those are the fears that I'm not overcoming yet. And so, yeah, you mentioning that has just put it into perspective for me and made me realize that I take those fears that I have overcome for granted. And that is interesting.
Because I think because at the end of the day, I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to become fearless, and we will never be that, because fear in our just in our bodies produces chemicals. It produces anything, it keeps us alive. Like chemically, there's so much in it that it gives us. So, I think we put so much pressure on it, as even as you're saying, because I find it so relatable, being frustrated that things still, like you still feel specific fears around something or anxiety around something. And I think that it's just so human, because, at the end of the day, I think we're all, without, I think, consciously meaning to, but I think we're all trying to not be human, and we're all trying to be these versions of ourselves that I'm not sure what version we're trying to be exactly, but it's definitely a version that's, can conquer the world and, be at the top of the game all the time, be productive every single day, eat well, live well, do everything well, and not realizing the fact that our brains and our bodies are not machines, and that sometimes our nervous system just is a little out of whack, and sometimes our anxieties are going to creep up, and sometimes life sucks. And like the fears that guide us as well, at that point in time, I think it's hugely normal, but I also think it's just like, and I say it the most positive thing, so human to think that our fears scare us deeply, and that sometimes we don't actually have to fight the fear, rather as in fight the fact that I have this specific fear. Like, I know someone once told me that they wish they weren't afraid of, they wish they were rather afraid of snakes than afraid of being enough. And I thought that was such a relatable thing, because we're all so sick and tired of our own fears that we wish we could have something else. And I suppose that's the thing about being human, is that we kind of have to go through these journeys and hope that, at the end of the day, that our fears that we have, and all of our hopes and our dreams and all that, at the end of the day, still fits part of our identity at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah,
Tarina,
exactly.
so those are all the questions I have for you today. Do you have any more for me before we wrap up?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about the way in which you actually communicate. I know that you said earlier, like you write the way you speak, but in terms of your connection, like I find that the way that you write and the way you speak is a very like authentic, communicative style. Do you find that speaking to people has been something that you've always been natural at, or do you feel like that you've kind of taught yourself to communicate to actually, connect with people more?
Well, it's quite interesting that you say that because I started this podcast because I felt like I was shitty at speaking to people. That was the sole reason why I started the podcast, is so I could practice speaking to people, come across more charismatic and confident while I speak. And that was the main reason. And then like the interesting conversations were a byproduct, and now they're sort of becoming like the fuel. But the initial reason I started was so I could improve at speaking, because while I was in Hong Kong, I was teaching English to like really young children and having to simplify my English to speak to all of my local colleagues. And so I found that a lot of vocabulary started just like vanishing from my head. And it was the most frustrating feeling in the world. And I still get it today. I'm still like trying to recover it. But with all the writing I'm doing and now is speaking to people more frequently, that's starting to improve again. But it still happens, like even in this conversation, like a few times that words have not come to mind. They're on the tip of my tongue and I have to change tact and like use another word. And it's really frustrating. And so that main frustration is also like the main reason why I started this podcast. So just like my newsletter of how I wanted to become a better writer and force myself to learn particular topics, I started the podcast because I didn't think I came across charismatic enough and confident enough while speaking. And I wanted those words that were on the tip of my tongue to actually come to mind at the exact time I needed them. And so that's why I started.
That's incredible. I love that. I absolutely love that. I think that's so inspirational as well. Like I really do, because I think that born out of like frustration on those type of things, I think the only way one for ourselves that we can actually push ourselves to, kind of relieve ourselves of the frustration is through going back and redoing all these things all the time. And also for other people, like, I mean, yeah, that's really inspirational. Like
Oh,
that's really cool.
thanks. Well, it seemed like one of the only options I had, because like you could practice in cold calling, which is a skill I want to improve because sales is so important. But I've never really been in a role in any job where I've needed to sell something and pick up the phone and sell people. But I wanted to improve on that skill. I don't have a product to sell at the moment, so I don't know who I'll be phoning or what I'll be saying to them. So this was kind of like the next best thing. And I've really loved it. So I'm very happy I started.
That's incredible because I mean, my one friend hasn't started a podcast or anything, but they also really want to get to be able to speak to people better, like kind of pitch themselves or whatever. So they just went on a lot of first dates with a lot of different people, and they said that. Like when I even spoke to him the other day, he said to me he's got to go back to dating because he finds that his conversational skills are not up to scratch. So he's got to go back because it's like an interview. You're just going on these first date interviews all the time. And he said it was the best practice he had
Yeah,
for it. I mean, I wouldn't say that was, advice for people, but
it makes perfect sense. It's if you're getting frustrated with your speaking skills or you don't feel like you're coming across the way you want to, you just got to put in the reps. It's the same with anything.
yeah.
It's just put in the reps and you'll get better at it.
Yeah,
It's pretty
exactly.
pretty simple.
Exactly. Oh, well, that was great. Well, I mean, thank you for answering those. Like, I really do really enjoy the way that you speak and all that. So that was really great.
Well, thank you. And thank you for joining me. And A closing tradition of every podcast is I ask my guest how they think I can improve this podcast. So, do you have any feedback for me?
Wow. I would say that in terms of the flow and the content of this podcast, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wish that I could give you like some form of constructive feedback, but I really thought that the questions were really well researched. I was really shocked about the dates you pulled out there. Really well researched, and I really enjoyed the authentic conversation. I find it's very valuable. So I don't have any constructive feedback in terms of anything negative, but I would say that this, in terms of conversational, like if you do this every single time, like, and I can only imagine it get even better, like incredible podcast. So I would love to always listen to this.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, that's the goal, just to keep improving one episode at a time. So thanks again for joining me, Tarina. I really enjoyed this episode a lot. I thought the discussion was amazing. So thank you for your time, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.